Welcome back, everybody. Bobby and I are anxious to keep going with the Kickstarter conversation we've been having. And we recently talked about how some people who are well known in the industry have made Kickstarter work so well for them. But if you're not well known, if you're just the one trying to start a project, how do you make your project stand out enough to get noticed? Any ideas, Bob?
Well, I think it's what we come up against is what genre you create in this book in. I know for myself, I have one for Skystorm, and I love superhero comics. It's what I grew up on. It's what I read now, and I read some other comics now, but it's what the majority I read now. So of course my creative juices went that way for the past 20 plus years. It's get real. Marvel and DC have that down. They've got that part down doing the superhero comics. So what I'm facing is, how do I take something one way and brand it and push it and try to draw a larger audience? And I'm looking at more fantasy, science fiction and fantasy, and there's tons of those elements in my book, but it's not where I was thinking. So yeah, I'm looking myself on how to reach a larger audience to successfully pull off a Kickstarter.
So yeah, you're right. Marvel and DC publish so many superhero books in a given week, let alone a month. Okay. It's hard to distinguish yourself from Marvel and DC since they do it so much that you may have a wonderful idea for a superhero and do the job very, very well, but people aren't going to support your book when they can just go buy another book from Marvel or DC. So you have to make yourself different somehow.
Yeah, one thing is definitely getting out and using social media to build an audience. So you're bringing that audience to Kickstarter, but Kickstarter also always brags, we bring audience to you. And that hasn't been my experience myself. I have drawn more people into Kickstarters I've done over the years myself. But yeah, you've got to, and we were talking earlier about somebody who's going in a whole different direction with the comics, and maybe that's what you do from the beginning. If you know you're going to take this book and you're going to crowdfund it, then you want to do it in an area that's going to be the most successful for you. But as I'm saying that, I'm thinking you also want to enjoy the creative process. So if I want to make superhero comics, I'm going to make superhero comics. You know what I mean?
There's a limit to doing something that you just don't want to do just to try to get it out there is not going to work well for you. No. So you have to find, appeal to audiences, find a spin on your character or your presentation to reach other audiences. You mentioned something very important of like building your own audience. But there's another way to approach that is finding an audience that is already there and not being served.
Sure. We had talked about Josh Blaylock earlier, and you had talked about the political end. But before we jump into that, let me say, I saw him at Cincy last year, and he gave me a comic about Bitcoin. And he did a comic for Bitcoin, took it to some big convention or something, I don't know, some rally, and sold a ton of those. And I can't remember if he was commissioned to do the book and that's why he did it, but we got talking about Bitcoin. We've both been investors in Bitcoin back and forth. And I was really surprised. And then he was doing these alien archaeology type he's really reaching out for some different audiences. It's cool. And it doesn't surprise me with Josh. I've known him a long time, but
that's a project he's got coming out soon through Diamond, but it's incredibly researched. There is a field of historical research that's looking at the somewhat bizarre and based on actual research, looking at things that the mainstream might seem as a little bit too far-fetched or science fictional, but there's actually foundational research that a lot of these things may be true. So he's taking information that is well researched and speculated on and putting it into a story format. So there's already an audience of people who are sharing this type of research and communicating with each other. So he's creating a story form for them. So he found an audience that's dedicated to what they study and is giving them a story.
Okay.
And so that's what you talked about, of finding an audience that is already there but might not being served. His political comics are, some people think that they're terrible. It depends on what side of the spectrum you're on, okay? But he's selling political comics to one side or the other because that's not your normal comic book reader. These are people who are passionate about certain political candidates, and you put together a story form of their story, and their fans are going to buy it.
Oh,
So
yeah.
these are ways to, to make money, but also to, to foster your creative outlets. But you're right. You can't, if you have no interest in doing a political comic book whatsoever, you're not going to do a good one.
Right.
Josh is very invested himself in the historical research that he's doing the story about. So he's taking another passion of his and turning it into a story. But finding those unique and underserved markets is a challenge, but it can be done.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And Josh is always out there diving into stuff like that. He always surprises me, some of the stuff he comes up with. But it's cool. It's very cool. And I just came across his Bitcoin comic the other day, cleaning out the studio here. So
he's not afraid to take risks. They're not all going to work. but if you want that perfectly safe Kickstarter project that everyone's going to jump on, that's not going to happen. You have to take some risks.
You're going to have to take risks. I don't think there's a certain safe way of doing a Kickstarter, and so it really comes down to get a project done, you got to have passion about it. So it's got to be something that you care about, and then you've got to work on getting that audience built around it to bring it to the crowdfunding platform, whether it's Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And then eventually you hope maybe you can take that audience, if it continues to grow, out to bookstores or comic shops. You just never know. But there's no safe way to get out there and doing it. But one of the things is, how do you make your Kickstarter unique, stand out? And one, like you said, is find another market and reach out to them. So I guess through social media, conventions, rallies, or whatever you can do. But I wonder how else you can make your project stand out and being unique.
So about trying to find existing fan bases and craft a story for that. Look at what else you're interested in besides comics. A really devoted fan base is Sherlock Holmes fans.
Oh yeah.
Sherlock Holmes is in public domain. The beginning stories. You can do a Sherlock Holmes comic book, but if you just put it out there without really contacting Sherlock Holmes fans, it won't do very well. But if you can mobilize that fan base to support your project, that's an example. And there are other examples like that out there of fan bases of a variety of different things. Okay. And you'd be surprised how rich that area can be of trying to get those people to buy your book, where the average person walking into a comic book would not be interested in it.
Right. Or they would never find it.
Exactly.
Because they don't come in comic shops. And same thing starting to be with bookstores. So definitely. I hadn't thought about that. And I wonder, I guess Tarzan's not in public domain, is it? ERB?
No. I believe the very first novel is, but you could not put the name Tarzan on your book because that is trademarked and copyrighted. So yes, you do have to get into some legal weeds about these things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even the Sherlock Holmes property, there's the Arthur Conan Doyle estate is claiming rights that they probably don't have. Okay. Yeah. So there are book publishers that are publishing new Sherlock Holmes books, but they have to state that they're not trying to establish trademark or copyright.
Right. That's interesting.
Yes, you can't jump in and say, I own Sherlock Holmes or I own Tarzan. And you could publish a Tarzan comic book, but not put Tarzan on it. I would stay away from Edgar Rice Burroughs people because they are very organized and very litigious.
They are.
But there are other fandoms out there that have similar things. Okay. The proliferation of steampunk for a few years ago was a great example of finding a group of people that were passionate about something and creating comics and marketing to those people.
Yep, I agree. And there still is some, steampunk and stuff like that going on. fantasy, D&D, always, the Dungeon and Dragon stuff you get with, because you would pull in from the Game of Thrones area, you pull in from the Harry Potter fan base.
That's having a huge revival. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to go out and make yourself stand out, but you still have to, and this is what we're doing over at ShoutFyre, is trying to teach you how to create your fan base, your market, because you've got to have those to be successful with a Kickstarter or be successful with a crowdfunding, or even if you're just putting it on Amazon or something like that. You got people who's got to know about you and got to find you.
And it always comes down to the quality of your work. You can't throw this out there on Kickstarter if you're not really ready to produce a book that's going to be able to compete with what else is on the market.
No, I agree. And you got to be honest with yourself as far as the quality of it, and ask for help and suggestions and reviews, and you'll get better. And sometimes, teaming up with other people to put out a good product is a good way to do that. But yes, Kickstarter there is a group of them that are using Kickstarter as a way to get their stuff out there. So, we had spoken about that in the last podcast. So you definitely want to make your items unique, make them stand out.
And we're going to do some other tutorials really on how exactly to go through the Kickstarter process, because unless you know the process step by step, you're going to wind up trying to reinvent the wheel constantly.
Yes. And something I just stumbled across is a friend of mine, Brent Fowler. He actually designs graphics and stuff for Kickstarter projects. I didn't know Brent did that. And so Brent Fowler, if you think about doing a Kickstarter and you need some graphics done up, he's available. There's a fee, but he does beautiful design work. And I didn't realize it was a business, but it is. And so, that's because you want.
Saying before, there's so many elements that if you've not gone through the process or studied it, you think, oh, well, it's pretty easy. I just make my comic book and quote unquote put it on Kickstarter. Well, there's more than that, just putting it on Kickstarter. There's so many different things to make sure that you don't follow their minimum requirements of what you need to do, but also follow what's working on successful Kickstarter platforms. Also, one important thing, study some of the non-successful ones. Look at what they did and how they did it, and see if you can, as a consumer, say what were they lacking, what did they not get across about their project.
And most of the time, I can tell you, it's not working in creating a fan base prior. It's because that fan base is going to go out and promote you and tell other people about you and help you expand it. So, but right now we're in the process of setting up some streaming for ShoutFyre, and definitely Kickstarter setups will be one thing that you and I could actually sit here and discuss as I'm showing it on the screen step by step. So that's something we do down the road, which would be fun. So I could bring in you on a call, and we can sit here and I can share the screen with you, and we can talk them through a Kickstarter setup.
Oh, that'd be excellent, because you can learn it on your own, but the more you can tap into what other how they've navigated the process, and you talk to several people who had one after another failed Kickstarter until they finally learned. It wasn't so much the improvement of what they were actually selling, but the improvement in how they learned the process and how to make the process work to their best advantage.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of steps to it, like you said, and a lot of trial of errors. But, like one thing we said over ShoutFyre, we're going to try to do more step by step. I'm going to be doing a comic Kickstarter probably this summer with Paradox Wars. And I'll record every step from the graphics to you and I have talked about interviews to recordings to everything that I've learned doing successful ones, researching the ones that weren't successful. Biggest thing is outreach. With the successful Kickstarter, your first week, you're going to get most of your fans and your family who comes in and supports you. And then you're going to get more support probably from Kickstarter and other areas that last week. There's 2 weeks in between. If you run a 4-week campaign, is where you need to be putting out interviews, art previews, podcasting, reaching out to anybody and try to get interviews out live at that point in time. So there's a lot of scheduling. It's a lot of work. It's 4 weeks of like I call it having a baby, because you feel like in 4 weeks you go from here, we're having this, and here, if it's going to show up, it has to be successfully funded. So 4 weeks of like carrying this thing and just promote. Even if you're not getting any sales, those 2 middle weeks, you've got to get out there and promote, because they will help that last week. So there's a lot to it to be successful with it. But one of the major part is be unique and try to reach out to other areas, other Facebook groups, other social medias, and try to build a fan base for your art prior to the Kickstarter, definitely.
And realize you may need a team to work on this. This is a lot of work to put on one person's shoulder, but you have to reach out to friends and family who, they're not writing and drawing the book with you, but you'll find there are people that will be willing to help you and do some of these time-consuming things that are necessary to make it successful.
Yes, and a lot of things you want to try to do prior to your launch. You and I have spoken about, I want to do some roundtable interviews for the Camelot Forever Kickstarter. It's a book that we're going to be launching, and we want to do those in advance. We don't want to do those during the Kickstarter. We want to do those interviews in advance. They're going to be video interviews, and we want to do those in advance, cut them, create them, boom, have them ready to launch within that 4 week period.
And
so
I actually know people who didn't have their book finished when we had planned to finish it during that 4 week period, and find out that it's not really going to work.
Well, some of the Kickstarters you can do and say, hey, this book's going to ship in 6 months. I think that's a nightmare. I think a lot of people have been jaded by unfinished and undelivered projects.
Right.
So I'm not too sure. You need to have a bulk of it finished. I know Paradox Wars, it's penciled, inked, and colored. It just needs to be lettered. I plan on having a bulk of it lettered prior to the Kickstarter. Even though I'm thinking about going in and tweaking a lot of the colors and going with more of an animation style, you need to have a lot of it done. It will go a long ways. The more you can show, more you can present, will go a long way to people supporting you and backing you. So
to circle back about looking for a unique product, you also have to be wary and not make it so unique that nobody cares.
Yeah, like I like to build, and then one of my current project is a deck. Yeah, I know it's the middle of the winter, but a comic book on building decks probably is not going to be successful.
But a lot of people build decks.
But they're not the ones that sit around and read comics. Well, they might sit around and read comics, but they probably don't want to sit around reading a comic about building a deck.
Yeah, so that would be unique, okay? That would fit the criteria, but it also has to be entertaining, and it also has to be something that you are entertained with and you can remain focused on for that creative project, okay?
Yes.
So uniqueness is important, but not to the point of you turning out a bad product that's not going to sell anyway.
Right.
Well, I think that about wraps us up for today, Bob. We got a lot of interesting things talked about there, and we're going to be doing a lot more on this subject in the future as we break it down into very specific steps.
Yes, I agree. It was a great one.
Talk to you next time.